We're looking at The Loneliness of the Digital Nomad, 4,000 Weeks, Time Managed for Mortals by Oliver Berkman. And I'm just going to read this right off the bat. This first introduction paragraph. That patience isn't the only way in which it's possible to find a deeper sort of freedom in surrendering our temporal constraints. Instead of always trying to dictate how things unfold, there's another way to be in the world. Another concern, the perpetually irritating phenomenon that we experience, is other human beings. We can experience other people as impeding on our time, scooting into our productivity. And it's a principle common to almost all productivity advice in an ideal world that the only person who would be making decisions about your time would be you. You'd set your own hours, you'd work whenever you choose, take vacations when you wished, and really be beholden unto nobody. But there's a case to be made that this degree of control comes at a cost that's not worth paying. This is a cost individually, it's cost socially, it's cost politically. What's happened is that, although this chapter kind of initially, it didn't connect with me the way some of the others have. Berkman makes this point that if we have all the freedom in the world, all the individual freedom in the world that we could ever want, we can determine our schedule, we can do whatever we want, it doesn't really mean anything if that freedom doesn't actually open us up to spend time with those that we love. You see, there's this really important distinction in the different types of goods in the world. We often think about time as a finite good. We think about time as something that we can store up or something that we can control. We think of it as a resource that's more valuable based on how much of it we get. But it's not completely true, because no matter how much time you have individually, if you can't actually connect with other people in that time, it doesn't really matter. He talks about, as with money, it's good to have plenty of time, all else being equal. But having all the time in the world isn't much use if you're forced to experience it on your own. If you have all the control of your time that you have, but you're isolated, it's not usually pleasant. And he talks about this experience from the author Mark Manson. He says he was traveling, and he says, last year I saw the Taj Mahal. I saw the Great Wall of China. I saw Machu Picchu in the span of 3 months, but I did it all alone. He said he was talking to a friend, somebody else who was kind of in this digital nomad lifestyle. And he said that he burst into tears in a small suburb of Japan, watching families ride their bikes together, just playing in the park. And it dawned on him that his supposed freedom, the freedom to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted to do it, actually put him out of reach from the way that he wanted to actually live his life. And so a really key distinction in this conversation for us today is this distinction between finite goods, which we can store up, and immaterial, spiritual, or non-finite goods. Now, a finite good like money, the more money I have, the less money you have. But something like friendship, something like kindness, something like compassion or generosity, the more compassionate I am, the more compassion there is in the world. The more friendly I am, the more friendliness there is in the world. The more generous I am, the more loving I am, the more of those things exists. And these are higher level goods. It's not these goods that we can accomplish and kind of store up. We can't do anything with that. We're going to leave it all here one day. And so he says time is better approached as something to share, even if that means surrendering some power to decide exactly what you want to do with it and when. And so what we're exploring here is that I want to make this important distinction between the idea of freedom as freedom from constraints and restraints, which is I typically think what in the West we think of freedom as. Freedom is to do what I want. It's the freedom to not be constrained. It's the freedom to not be told what to do. But there's a different kind of freedom. And that's the freedom for. Not the freedom from, but the freedom for a meaningful existence. The freedom for connection. And what's been resonating with me more and more and more throughout this book, throughout my life, throughout my prayer, meditation, spirituality, all this stuff, is freedom for meaningful participation in reality. That we like to kind of think about, us living our lives. But there really is a way in which I look back at my life, and although it maybe feels like I'm in control now to some degree, I look back at my life and I see that so much of my life happened to me. Even things like meeting my wife, who, I made this commitment, I chose to marry her. What if I didn't meet her that first day, when we were in college together? We so totally underestimate the intricate and intrinsic dependence of all things on each other. And we so overestimate our own power because it gives us a sense of control. But I think that sense of control and the need that we have for it is part of what's making us miserable. Because if we continue to believe that freedom is having complete power over our schedules, we might fail to realize that the more individual freedom we gain, the more disconnected we become from other people, because we're off living our lives alone, but detached from community, detached from the whole. And so I want to really invite you guys here to reflect. You could share it here in the comments or the comments below. What are these images of freedom that you have? It's easy to think about life like, man, I wish I could just go, and he even talks about this man that lives his life all on a yacht. Like he just lives his life on one cruise after another cruise after another cruise, doing whatever he wants. Berkman says, but I couldn't shake the sense that he was remarkably lonely. And so I want to ask you guys, what do you envision as your ideal life? And if you played that out over and over and over and over again, is it an individualistic experience, or is it shared? And this is one of the things that Murray Bowen talks about. It's called the differentiation of self. Murray Bowen says that we all have this drive towards two poles. We all hold within us two polarities. One towards individuality, autonomy, freedom, and one towards community, connection, surrender, and relationship. He says, inescapably, every single one of us, really, it's true that I am my own person, and also I am inescapably part of a community. I can't avoid that. Now, in the family, when we develop in families, if our families are highly emotionally constrained, if they're highly emotionally reactive, or we develop in societies that are highly emotionally constrained or emotionally reactive, what happens is we get forced to choose. We learn that I can either be my own person and be rejected, or I can be a part of the community, but I have to sacrifice myself. And so I just want you to reflect on your life. Have you had to polarize towards one or the other? Have you had to polarize towards going along with what other people want? Or have you felt the need to polarize towards individuality? And Murray Bowen says that our task is to actually hold both at the same time, to not sacrifice one for the other, but to be able to say that I, John Paul Dabrowski, I am both unequivocally my own individual person and absolutely a member of my community, of my family, of my society. I'm inescapably individual and relational. And the reason that we get forced to choose one or the other is emotional reactivity. You see, when there's heavy emotional forces, there's not the reflective capacity to actually be both connected and aware. We either have to quiet ourselves and go along with the outside, or we have to be captivated by the outside and go along. And this is something that I think in our society we're really losing. Emotional reflective capacity. And this is what mindfulness is. The ability to be present and to observe the emotions and the thoughts that I'm having on the inside without fusing to them, without identifying that with them, without, in the words of IFS, blending and seeing the world through these feelings. We want to learn to look at our feelings rather than looking constantly from our feelings. And in this way of living, right, we also have to ask, what is the good? What is it? What is the life that we want to live? And this is one of the things that Aristotle points out. If we want to understand the good life, if we want to live well, if we want to understand what's worth doing in life, we have to understand what's good. And in this, again, this theme continues to come up in my life, across society, and in this work. There are instrumental goods. Goods, things that are good because of what they bring about, right? A car is good because it gets me from point A or B. But Aristotle says it can't all be about these instrumental goods, because then the point of life would be to do this, to do this, to do X to get to Y, to do Y to get to Z, to do Z to get to A. And we would just be in this endless cycle of accomplishment, which is where I think our culture at large is stuck, because we don't have a philosophy of what's good. Because what's good is solely individualistic, we have no way of not no way, but we lose connection with the greater whole. And so Aristotle says that the good life cannot just be made about of getting from point A to get to point B, to get from point B to get to point C, to get from point C to get to point D. It can't just be this instrumental advance, because then it would be meaningless in a sense. Instead, Aristotle says, there's another type of good. And these align with those spiritual goods. These are things that are good in and of themselves. They're things that are worth doing, not because of what they bring about, although they do bring about good things. But the intrinsic goods are good because it's in their very nature. Something like friendship. Friendship isn't good because it gives me companions, although it does give me that. Friendship is good because it's part of the goodness of human life. Love isn't good because it gives me stability, although it does do that. It's good because it is a good thing. Compassion isn't good because it brings healing. It's good because it is a good thing. Art that's beautiful, it's not good because it accomplishes some task or because it can be sold for X or Y price. It's good because beauty in its very nature is good. And so one of the things that Berkman argues throughout this work is against this instrumentalization of everything. And he talks about arguing against this instrumentalization and this individualistic imperialism towards time. He talks about the Soviet Union. Essentially, they had this design to, what's the line here? He says, the scientific management aimed at squeezing the maximal amount of output from American factory workers. He says, they announced in August 19th, 2029, that a week would not be seen in 7, but in 5 days long. Each worker would have 4 days a week, followed by 4 days of work, followed by 1 day of rest. Crucially, though, the idea wasn't for all the workers to follow the same calendar. Instead, they'd be divided into 5 groups, identified by color green, yellow, orange, purple, or red. Each person would be assigned to a different work day, so that the operations of work in the factories would never stop. But the main effect for ordinary citizens was to destroy the possibility of social life. It was a simple question to schedule things. 2 friends would be assigned to 2 different calendar groups, would never be free to socialize at the same time each day. Husbands and wives were supposed to be assigned to the same group, but they weren't. Sundays and religious gatherings were out the windows. As one factory worker put it daringly, what are we to do at home if my wife is in the factory? If the children are in school? And if no one can come to see us, what is left to go but to go to the public tea room? And what kind of life is that? When holidays come in shifts, and not for all workers together. There is no holiday if each holiday is to be celebrated by oneself. Berkman talks more about the power of synchronicity, the power of that this soldier who joined, he was joining in World War II for like a technical position. So he didn't really expect much in terms of training. But he said that he was unprepared for the experience of marching with his fellow soldiers, which overwhelmed him. And this man said, marching aimlessly about the drill field, swaggering in conformity with prescribed military postures, conscious only of keeping in step as to make the next move correctly and in time, somehow felt good. Words are inadequate to describe the emotion aroused by the prolonged movement in unison that drilling involved. A sense of pervasive well-being is what I recall. More specifically, a strange sense of personal enlargement, a sort of swelling out, becoming bigger of life, thanks to this participation in the collective ritual. Moving briskly, keeping in time, it was enough to make us feel good about ourselves, satisfied to be moving together, and vaguely okay with the way things were. That we as humans long for connection, we long for community, we long for participation. But this participation cannot be attained by surrender. Nor is it good when that participation is completely authoritarianly prescribed. But that's one of the things that makes us actually vulnerable to it. When we're all separated, we long even more for connection, which, as Berkman says later, makes us vulnerable politically to autocratic leadership. He says again that he experienced this while volunteering at a local soup kitchen. For that matter, I felt in settings that are even more mundane, working my monthly shift at the food cooperative, for example, slinging boxes of carrots and broccoli onto the conveyor belt, in time with other workers I barely knew, but for whom, for hours, I shared this strange bond that felt deeper in some sense, the one that I had with my real friends. And for a while, it's as if we are participating in the communal rhythms of a monastery, in which synchronized hours of prayer and labor bring a coherence and a shared feeling of purpose from the day. And so one of the things that I really want to ask you to reflect on, and you could share here, is where in your life do you have space? And if in your life you have space for this participation, space to be part of something bigger, part of a connected group, organized and connected in this same kind of unifying vision. Where in your life is your time actually synchronized to connect with those that you love? To connect in a meaningful way that's not about what it brings out, but that's about participating in this beautiful universe. He says in the end here, the trouble with our kind of individualistic freedom, as Judith Shulevitz points out, is that a society enthralled to it, as ours, ends up desynchronizing itself, imposing upon itself something surprisingly similar to the Soviet Union's totalitarian control. We live our lives less in the same temporal grooves as another. And the unbridled reign of this individualistic ethos, fueled by the demands of the market economy, has overwhelmed our traditional ways of organizing time, meaning that the hours in which we rest, the hours in which we work, and the hours in which we socialize become even more uncoordinated. It's harder than ever to find time for a leisurely family dinner, a spontaneous visit to a friend, or any type of collective project. Not only that, there's political implications too. Because the result of not having places that we are connected means that we have a longing for that kind of connection while also being more and more disconnected from each other. The result is a vacuum of collective action, which gets filled by autocratic leaders who thrive on the mass support of the people who are otherwise disconnected, alienated from another, stuck at home on the couch, a captive audience for televised propaganda. Totalitarian movements are mass organizations of atomized, isolated individuals, wrote Hannah Arendt. It's in the interest of an autocrat that the only real bond his supporters should feel is commitment to him. And so Berkman brings us to this realization that, we don't all have this huge power to sway the collective. That's true. But he says, but we do get to decide whether we are going to collaborate with the ethos of individual sovereignty or to resist it. You can push your life a little further in the direction of freedom for participation and connection, or freedom from control. You can do this by prioritizing activities in the physical world and committing to rituals, routines, and forms of participation that aren't purely about what you get out of it. He says here at the last, and if you're like me and you possess the productivity geek's natural inclinations towards control freakery when it comes to your time, you can experiment with what it feels like to not try to exert an iron grip on your timetable, to sometimes let the rhythms of family life and friendship and collective action take precedence over your perfect morning routine or your system for scheduling your week. This is one of the things that's just been so repeatedly evident for me in group work, which I absolutely love group work. Even, group work really is as effective as individual therapy. The research finds this over and over again. But still, people have this resistance of, I don't think I'll benefit from it. I don't want to be in a group that's focusing on other people. I want help with my problems. Or people can feel that I really need to focus on this. That itself, this resistance, is actually a sign of how desperately we need connection, because we're relational beings and our hurt is relational. One of the greatest pains in our culture right now is isolation and disconnection. You don't solve isolation and disconnection simply by looking at yourself. You resolve it by taking the courage to meet others, to surrender that need for absolute control, to join something bigger. And so in group work, what's beautiful and what's magnificently powerful is what happens when a group of people says, yes, I want help with this, and I'm willing to do it together. And so in our groups, what we do is we're united on the single purpose. Our groups are 5 to 8 people. We're united on this single purpose to practice being present in the moment and to share with honesty and spontaneity what's on our mind. And it's amazing to me, in a matter of 3 weeks, say, the amount of connection and felt sincerity and authentic care for each other that develops there. But I think it's because of this, because we long to be connected. We long for spaces where we can find that belonging and where we can find authentic and sincere dialogue, the kindness of people who are willing to tell the truth, even when it might be uncomfortable. This is one of the most kind things that you can do, to take the courage to say what's true in a loving and caring way, but to say the truth and not to muddle it. We need connection. We need each other. And what I really believe that we need, what the meaning of our life is, participation. And to participate in life means doing two things, both learning to surrender and learning to step in. And surrender doesn't mean not trying. Surrender means recognizing our values and living in those values according to life, even when it's risky and scary. Surrender means surrendering the outcome and in choosing to show up for those things that are good in and of themselves, those things that are worth doing, no matter how they turn out. So I'd love to hear from you guys, what your reflections here are. So we're talking about this sense of time, this kind of individualistic sense of time. I'd love to hear the questions or thoughts or reflections you guys might have here for a few minutes before we wrap up here. We learn to participate in reality by observing, by paying attention, by listening and receiving. This is the practice of mindfulness. This is the practice of consciously exploring what's happening in the here and now, not having to interfere with it, not having to change it. So I welcome, the thoughts, reflections that you have regarding this or maybe anything else. The longings you might have for connection, the challenges you find in the way that we organize around time, maybe the fears of connection, the fears of seeking this way of being in the world that isn't about completely controlling everything to get what we want, but actually opening to the participation of life. This idea of actually being our own person means actually letting go of the need to be completely in control. And again, taking life on its terms, not ours. So maybe here I'll give another moment for reflection here. And maybe we'll wrap it up here for today. Thank you all for joining me. If you'd like to join, if you want to get my written reflection, which is a little bit less off the top and more thoughtful. If you want to get my written reflection, you can comment book club, and I'll add you to the email list. I send an email every Tuesday with the video recording of this conversation. So if you want a video recording of this conversation, comment book club. I'll send that out on Tuesday along with a written reflection. And then next week, we are going to be reading Cosmic Insignificance Therapy. And that's pages 203 to 214. And then we're coming towards the end here of our book club, which is kind of surreal, kind of sad. The chapter of that, The Human Disease, that'll be our last chapter. So comment book club if you want to catch the tail end of this. And then we'll read the afterwards. So we got about 2 or 3 weeks left. So thank you all for being here. I'm glad to be with you. I hope you guys have a wonderful Friday, and see you next time. Peace.